And today we have our first speakers here, Mr. Andrew Dowling. Can I speak Thai? Yeah. Okay. กราบเรียนท่านผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านนะคะตอนนี้นะคะคนที่อยู่ข้างเราคือสปีกเกอร์ท่านแรกนะคะคุณแอนดรูว์ ดอลลิงนะคะจะมาพูดถึงเรื่องของ innovating for an aging population challenge and opportunity นะคะยังไงวันนี้ขอเสียงปรบมือให้คุณแอนดรูว์ด้วยค่ะ
Thank you, and I'd like to say thanks very much for having me here today to speak with you. It's a great honour. Before I begin, I would like to convey my deepest condolences to all of the Thai people over the recent passing of His Excellency King Bhumibol Adulyadej. He was greatly respected, not just here in Thailand, but all around the world, and his loss will be greatly felt, and our thoughts and prayers are with you. Can we have the presentation? Fantastic. So, we're having a problem here. Here we go. Let's get introduced. Okay. So I'm Andrew Dowling. I'm a technology entrepreneur. In fact, I'm a serial technology entrepreneur, which means I've done multiple startups. And today, that's not all that uncommon. There's a lot of focus on startups today, but what makes me a little bit different is that I've had a great focus on innovation and technology for the aging population. We do have a problem with this. So today I am the CEO and founder of a company called Stitch. And Stitch is the world's leading companionship and activity site for anyone over 50. We've got offices in Sydney and San Francisco. Before Stitch, I launched a company called Tapestry. And I'm really sorry about this, but I think we have a... And Tapestry was a tablet-based technology solution to help seniors connect to their communities and access the services that they need. I am also one of the founding members of an organisation, a global organisation called Aging 2.0, which is a global innovation network devoted to accelerating innovation, which is focused on improving the lives of seniors around the world. So today, my speech is called Innovating for an Aging Population, Challenges and Opportunities. But another title, which I potentially could have used, is How to Learn from Failure and Innovate Successfully. Because this is actually what innovation is all about, being prepared to fail and learn from those failures. So in the talk today, I'm going to cover four main things. Number one, why aging? Why is aging important as we look at innovation and opportunities for businesses in the next 20 years? I will then talk about some of the opportunities that exist, but also some of the challenges, because this is not an easy place to innovate in, and there's a lot of challenges that are very specific to aging. I'm going to give you a couple of case studies around failure and success. And I say failure and success because, as you'll see, those terms are actually relative depending on what it is that you're aiming for. And finally, I'll be talking a little bit about what that means for you, and particularly with this focus on innovation and Creative Thailand 4.0 for the opportunities for Thailand and what it might mean for you if you're looking at innovating in this area. So let's start with why aging. So you may not know it, but you are living today through the biggest demographic trend in human history, the aging population. There has never, ever been a larger demographic change in the history of the world, and that's pretty significant. Today, people over 50 account for close to half of the US population, and it's going to be 50% by 2020. the demographic is growing at twice the rate of any other demographic. And in the US, it actually controls 70% of all the wealth. But this trend is not only, it's not only upon us, it's not only been happening for some time, but it's also accelerating. So today, there are 3 countries that we call super-aged, and these are countries in which 1 in 5 members of the population are over 65. And today, that's Germany, Italy, and Japan. But by 2020, which is not all that far away, there'll be 13 of them. So the pace of aging is increasing. And the thing about demographic trends, unlike technology trends, which we might predict what's happening in the future around technology, we might talk about virtual reality being the next big thing, but as we learned yesterday, it's actually really augmented reality. But a lot of those predictions may or may not come true. When it comes to demographic trends, we know it's going to happen. All of these people have been born already. So the predictions we make are very, very predictable and reliable. So this graph highlights the speed and acceleration of the aging population, and it shows for a number of countries how long or how many years it took the population to go, or the population of people aged 65 and over, from 7% of the population to 21%. And you'll see up the top, France and Sweden, 2 very developed economies, took a long time. 157 years from France, 122 years from Sweden. Today, we look, accelerate fast forward down to Japan was faster, South Korea and China, it's a fraction of the time, and today Thailand is actually the fastest aging society in Asia. Japan gets a lot of attention because it is an aged society, but the countries that are having to face the greatest change are the ones which are changing. Japan has already got to this point. Thailand's racing very quickly to get there. But the thing is, what this means is, this is an emerging market of over 1 billion people. So while we look at what's happening to societies, we'll see some of the changes and challenges. We also need to think about it from a market perspective about the opportunities that are there for business, for communities, and for government. So these are some of the things that you'll often hear talked about when we look at the implications for an aging population. So for a start, economies start to slow because they don't have the workforce that they used to have. In many countries, there's a healthcare crisis because the costs of health accelerate dramatically in the last years of your life. There's issues around social inequality because the people who have saved the money or the wealth to be able to sustain their standard of living as they stay living longer than expected will have one type of life. But for the many people who have not done so, they face a much more uncertain future. So you end up with this social inequality, and that has its own challenges. Social isolation becomes very, very important, and you'll see this is an area that I've been working on a lot, and I'll talk about that. Issues around ageism and elder abuse become more and more common. So scammers, children exploiting their parents, the financial challenges that you face if you have a parent who has Alzheimer's or some form of cognitive impairment. Housing becomes challenging because all of a sudden you find assets, the housing assets are in the hands of a relative few. There's not necessarily the same housing stock being created. How people can actually afford to live as they live longer than expected is a real challenge. And this last one is around products. So today, most products are designed for a younger audience. You can think about everything from can openers to electronic devices. Everything that we use pretty much today is designed with the bulk of the population traditionally have been younger users. And the senior consumer has been left behind and forgotten as an afterthought. And this has always been a problem. But as a larger proportion of the population becomes old, then products which are inferior and don't work for people with poor eyesight or arthritis or mobility issues, all of those products are going to face challenges, and the businesses that don't recognize this are going to fail. The flip side of that, of course, is the opportunity it creates. And so this is one of my favorite quotes: "When the challenges are greatest, so too are the opportunities," by Bill Ford. So today I will talk a little bit about the challenges, but I want to really, really focus on the opportunities. Because as you'll see, this is a worldwide issue, and the opportunities for Thai innovators are not just limited to Thailand. There are opportunities globally. So let's talk about those opportunities and challenges. So I mentioned before an organisation called Aging 2.0. And this is an image of one of the elder representatives for Aging 2.0, provides a lot of input to a range of businesses that are part of this worldwide movement. So what is Aging 2.0? It's a global innovation platform and I'll talk about what that means. It's a pretty broad statement, but it's got a mission about improving the lives of older adults around the world. And when we say around the world, we really mean around the world. So Aging 2.0 has chapters in I think 30 countries or more. And it involves collaborations between government, business, startups, existing incumbents in the housing, affordable housing, retirement living, looking at ways that we can attack and address some of the challenges of the aging population. Now, Aging 2.0 started in 2014, so it's a pretty young organisation, but has had a great deal of growth since then. So we talk about local chapters, and I believe there's a push to create a local chapter of Aging 2.0 here in Thailand, and we'd love to actually talk to anyone who's interested in this, but we have 37 local chapters around the world. A growing number of corporate partners that are really interested in working with the organisations to create innovations that span multiple business units. A lot of events, a lot of startups who are pitching and creating products. We've got 3,000 startups in the startup database, and a great increase in interest around the world. So what is it? So Aging 2.0 is an alliance really between a number of different providers inside the aging space. So we look at, on one hand, where there's the established senior care providers, and more and more are joining every day. Some of these are US organisations, some are from other countries. Some of them are huge, and they cater to hundreds of thousands of residents. Some are very small and mainly have one location. There's a bunch of industry groups that again look at how we address the needs of aging populations, distributors and platforms, startups, and then the main corporations, which again, by virtue of the fact that they are marketing to a broad audience, are growing in their understanding that the aging space is something they need to understand and address. So Aging 2.0 attempts to bring all of these stakeholders together and look for collaborative ways to innovate and identify opportunities to address some of the issues of the aging population. And the needs are great. So within all of these businesses, the senior care providers, and when we talk about senior care, we're not talking about just residential people who go and live in a residential retirement home, but anyone who services seniors as they live and age in the community. But there are social challenges that these businesses are looking to address. Issues around daily living. How do we actually address the daily routines of someone as they age, maybe develop dementia or some form of physical impairment? and oops, health and wellness. So obviously one of the big challenges as people age is how to address some of the health challenges that come with staying healthy longer. So one of the messages I wanted to convey today was there's a lot of need. There's a lot of work being done by existing businesses in the space looking at the needs of aging. And that's great. So if you've got a business or you're thinking about starting a business or you've got some ideas, there are organisations out there that can really help you start to focus some of the creative energy that you have about maybe starting your own business and creating services that service this market. But I also want to talk about some of the challenges. So one of the things that we've learned, and I'm going to go through a couple of case studies, is that many businesses or entrepreneurs, when they start to look at how do I address this opportunity in the aging space, I'm going to start by looking for partnerships with existing businesses. So if you're an American startup, for example, a lot of the American startups will look at trying to partner with the large aged care providers or some of the in-home care networks for distribution networks and so on. And that's great. There have been some fantastic success stories and I don't want to take away from them. However, I understand that as we're thinking about this problem from a Thailand perspective, where in Thailand there's not the same level or same structure when it comes to aged care that you have in America. That America has got a very well established residential aged care industry. And as we start looking at solving these issues from a Thai perspective, we need to look at, well, if we don't have those industries, what are our other approaches that we might take? And one of the messages I wanted to say is that actually can be an advantage. If you're an innovator or an entrepreneur in Thailand, you have an advantage because you can sidestep some of the challenges that come with dealing with an existing incumbent industry. And what I mean by that is one of the challenges that consistently comes up when startups or entrepreneurs look at creating businesses in the aging space is they need to move very quickly. One of the things about running a startup is you need to move fast, you need to experiment, you need to try some things out, see if they work, and keep on iterating until you get it right. And that doesn't always work so well if you're working with a very large incumbent that has been doing business the same way for 20 or 30 years. And that's because you will run up against what I call organisational inertia. So in the US or the UK, Australia, some of the leading aged care providers have been in business for a very long time. And they've learnt to do things a certain way because their number one goal is to make sure that they keep their residents safe, that they look after their needs, and they certainly don't want to take any risks. And that's totally understandable. But if you're wanting to innovate and address this market or address some needs and you need to move very, very quickly, that can be a challenge for you. So one of the messages from today's speech is that from a Thai perspective, it actually can be an advantage that you don't have a deeply developed retirement living or healthcare industry focused on seniors today, because it allows you to be a little bit more creative in your thinking when you start looking at addressing these challenges. And there are some trends that are really helping you in this case. So this is a graph of internet adoption over time of seniors versus all adults. And you can see that obviously seniors don't use the internet as much as their younger counterparts. But they've been growing, the adoption has been growing actually faster. And I think the fastest rate of adoption these days is people over 75. That's because obviously it's coming off a very low base. But what it does mean is that the opportunities for innovation and reach that you have for for innovations that actually can address some of these members of the population is changing. You don't necessarily need to rely on an existing supply chain or distribution network when you've got change like this happening. Now, obviously, this is actually US data rather than worldwide, and in some countries that adoption is lower. But what it's signifying is that where there is change, there's opportunities to do things differently. This is another one. So again, this is in the US, but what might surprise you is the most time spent online, the group that spends most time online out of the US baby boomers versus millennials is actually not the millennials, it's the baby boomers. So baby boomers are now spending more time in front of a computer. Now, they're not doing Instagram necessarily, but they are using the internet, and they're doing it in a very, very deep and highly engaged way that they weren't doing even 5 or 6 years ago. And I know this because I started a business 5 or 6 years ago, and I've seen that change. So that kind of brings me to this concept of failure and success. So this part of the talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about 2 case studies, and it may surprise you that those 2 case studies are both my own businesses, but that's because I know them very well. And what I'm trying to get at here is a little bit of an exposure to the sorts of things that can be done when you're looking at innovation around for an ageing population, but also some of the risks, challenges, and opportunities that you can face when you do so. So the first company I'll talk about is Tapestry. So it's case study 1. And you can probably guess by the title of this section, it's the failure, but it does have an happy ending. We started Tapestry 6 years ago, and we ultimately did sell it to a European company. But we learned a lot along the way, and we did not necessarily reach the targets that we were aiming for. So Tapestry, I started Tapestry after I left. I've come from a technology background. I worked for big global companies, spent most of my time actually working and living in Asia. But when I left, I became very interested in this whole issue of the aging population. And this was about 7 years ago, I guess. And not a lot of people were doing things for aging at that time. But I'd done a project and looked at some of these demographic trends and realised that really there needed to be an opportunity. There was an opportunity that needed to be looked at. And the thing that we really started with was that this realisation that people are living longer than they ever have before and leading healthier, being healthy longer into their old age. But the one thing that wasn't being addressed, and a lot of companies focus on, well, what does that mean from a health perspective? But one of the things that we learned in our research was there's actually something even worse for a senior's health than either smoking or obesity, and that's loneliness. Loneliness is a huge factor in people's lives as they get older, both in Western societies, but also to a growing extent in Eastern societies as well. So we started with the idea that we wanted to be able to provide a way for seniors to be able to stay connected to their families, to their communities, and access the services that they needed as they got older. We also recognised that the existing businesses for retirement living were focused on a small percentage of the population. So even in America, it's just under 10% of people will ever live in retirement living. In Australia, it's half of that, and obviously in countries like Thailand, it's much, much, much less. And consistently, people, as they get old, they want to stay in their own homes as long as possible. So we thought about, we tried a few different ideas, and what we came up with was this product called Tapestry. And Tapestry was a tablet-based solution, and this was actually, we started development before the iPad came out. But it was a tablet-based solution designed around trying to address some of these issues for a senior. And so it had a bunch of simple capabilities. There was a very private social networking component to it, to connect with family, but also the community around you, activities and so on. And the ability to access services, so anything from medicine reminders, ordering of meals, transport, and medical services. So this was the concept. And our target users were typically people who'd been left behind by technology. You saw that graph I showed earlier of internet adoption. We were trying to help the people who'd been left behind by that trend and provide them a solution that they could not get through modern technology. And the idea was the people who'd be providing this for them would be another person who had a vested interest in their well-being. So it might be a family member or it might be a retirement living facility. And this was Tapestry being used by, we found a range of communities which would adopt Tapestry and use it and become quite passionate about what it provided to them, because they'd never really used a computer before or even used the internet. So there was a lot of discovery that they would have. We had a bunch of success. So we had a lot of press about how great we were. We ended up launching in the US. We had sales around in Australia and the US. But ultimately, we hit disappointment. So we were trying to build a product that would reach critical mass, and when you're building a startup, you're looking for early signs of a number of things when it comes to either your business model or your scale or your viral growth. And with Tapestry, we found again and again that we really struggle. And this is something that happens as a persistent theme when it comes to innovating in the aging space. It's persistent in all startups, but particularly in aging, customer acquisition is the biggest challenge. Now, there's a number of reasons for that, but when we talk about customer acquisition, it's how quickly and cost effectively can you acquire a new customer. In Tapestry's case, we were being used in retirement living communities, in a bunch of these more, there's organisations in some countries that are community organisations that help seniors. We had religious organisations and so on. And we also had a bunch of families who might live in a different city or not be able to, the young family member might not be able to spend as much time as they would want to looking after their parent or grandparent, and they'd like to be able to do something to make them happy. But with all of these channels, we discovered that the speed with which we could acquire those new users was very, very slow. Now, we talked a little bit about inertia, but all of these businesses have one thing in common, that they're trying to run their own business, and they are looking for ways to do that most effectively. What Tapestry was a hybrid solution that allowed them to improve the well-being of their residents and make them happier. But it was just one extra thing to worry about. And if you're running a care facility, you've got a million things to worry about, let alone introducing a new technology. So we actually ended up being used in a number of facilities in the US, and with great success. The users loved it. But the adoption rate, the speed at which we could get it rolled out to new organisations was actually very slow. Sometimes we would start our first sales call with a company and they would not then adopt Tapestry for another 12 months, maybe even 18 months, a lot of discussion. So from an entrepreneur's perspective, and if you're looking at innovating, this is one thing to look out for. It is the fact that your cycle may be very slow in this industry because it's a very conservative industry. But at the same time, we were selling the product to family members. And of course, family members are able to make a quicker decision. But the one thing we've also learned is that if you're innovating for the aging population and you're relying on the purchasing decision being made by someone that is not the person who benefits, then that also slows down the adoption process because it's a nice to have rather than a must have. So if you're doing, and I hope there's going to be a number of people in this audience that at some point, as part of the whole Creative Thailand process, will go out and start running your own business or do your own startup. It'd be great. There's a number of students here, and I hope you all run your own business at some point. I really encourage people when they're doing a startup is to think of it as a series of experiments, because you can start with an idea of what is going to work, but I guarantee the moment that you get that idea out in the real world, you'll discover that pretty much nothing you thought about was going to happen. So the key is to run experiments, and those experiments, one of the things you need to be able to do is do as many as possible, do them as quickly as possible, and do them as cheaply as possible. So with Tapestry, we made the mistake of, we went out and spoke to a bunch of customers and spoke to a bunch of users and did a lot of research. And they all told us that this was a great idea, we really needed it, yes, please go ahead and build it. So we then spent the next 18 months building this product. And of course, we were focused on the product. The product was great. What we weren't focusing on was some of the things around the product to do with acquisition and how quickly could you get people, if they said they wanted it, to actually make that decision to buy. So this was a real lesson for me. Tapestry was my first startup, and I couldn't understand why this product that had won all these technology awards and had such a passionate user base just wouldn't be successful. But we also learned that we hadn't done our experiments the way we wanted to. So we said, right, look, we understand that social isolation is a huge need. In fact, the more we got involved in Tapestry, the more we understood it wasn't just seniors. And when I talk about seniors, I'm talking about 65 and up. But even people 50 and up would be telling us, well, I've got this issue too. When I get to a certain stage of my life, I feel isolated. So what we did, we said, right, we still believe in the market. We understand the need is there. We just haven't got the right product. There's not that product market fit. We can't afford to spend another 18 months building another product on the chance that it might be successful. Let's run some experiments. And we ran a few in parallel. One of them was a blog article I wrote about dating over 55. And so one of the things we learnt through Tapestry was just how lonely people were. And so we thought, well, this might be something that we could get some enthusiasm about, that when people reach a certain age, they're not dating isn't the same as it is when they're younger. They're actually not looking for romance as much anymore. In fact, in many cases, they're not looking for romance, but they are lonely. And so we did 3 experiments all in parallel. And they were very simple. This was just a blog article. And at the end of the blog article, we said, and we talked about the things that are different about once you get to this certain age. It's very easy to write a blog article. We then said we've actually got a product up and running. We did not, but we said we had a product up and running and were helping people find companionship in a community around San Francisco. And if people would like to be part of the product as it rolled out into other cities, please sign up. And so we wrote the blog article, we directed some Facebook advertising traffic to it, and we just decided to see how it went. And in 2 days, we had 250, I don't want to call them comments. People had written long essays about their feelings and the challenges of staying socially connected into their old age. They'd poured their hearts out to us and told us all of this information, and we had 500 sign-ups. So that was a very low cost, very fast experiment into what it would take to get people to acquire customers for a new product. And if we'd done something like that with Tapestry when we first began, we would have learned a lot about the challenges about acquisition from day one. So again, one of the takeaways here is that when you start building your idea, the new idea that you have, and it may not be about aging population, it doesn't matter what it is, but you can actually test that idea before you build it. You don't actually need to start building it before you test. So that is what led us to case study 2, which is Stitch. So I mentioned that Stitch is a community to help people find companionship, and it's only for people over 50. Now, I don't know if anyone knows where this image is from, but there's a movie called The Wizard of Oz. And in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy goes to look for the wizard, and he's meant to be this great magician. And at the end of the journey, she discovers he's not a great magician. After all, he's just a guy behind a screen pulling some levers. It just makes everyone think there's a real product there. So what I just described around testing before you build, we call that whole process the Wizard of Oz. Because you can build, say you want to build a booking platform or a service platform. You don't actually need to go and build it. You can just have a web page, and then at the back end, you can just be doing it all manually while you learn about your market. So that's what we did with Stitch. We had this response from the market that there was this need and people had a lot of appetite for what they wanted. And we said, well, we could go and build this thing, but we didn't have a lot of capital, we didn't have money or investment, but we really wanted to show that we could go further than just the number of people who would sign up on a blog. So we started building something, but again, it wasn't a real product. It kind of looked like a product, but we did a lot of things manually behind the scenes. And then very quickly, while we did that, our Wizard of Oz product, we started to grow quickly. And that was great. That was a really good indication that not only could we acquire more of those users, it helped us get a greater understanding of what they're looking for, and it gave us some real evidence that we could then go to investors to say, look, we really think there's something here that we would like to build. And what was really interesting was that all of the people who were signing up, over 50% of them had never used anything like Stitch before. You know, they'd never used a dating site, they'd never used anything. So we discovered that what we were doing was really unique because obviously nothing out there in the world appealed to them. Nothing that they'd seen before had made them want to try it. But when they looked at Stitch and understood the values that we were building and why we were building it, they wanted to give it a try. So they were very, very first time. So that was another really great indicator that we had something that was very, very different rather than just being another variation of something that already existed. And we learned a lot through that process. So we learned that loneliness is something that we need to look at whether we're in our 80s or in our 50s. It affects everybody. It affects them whether you're a man or you're a woman. And we really learned that loneliness was an even bigger issue than we had ever realized. The messages and the detail that our members were telling us about just what their life was like without feeling socially connected is tremendously challenging. So there's some huge health challenges here too. So if you're over 65 and you're lonely, you're 45% more likely to die and 64% more likely to develop dementia than your younger counterparts. Being isolated creates issues around affordable housing and also underemployment. So we found all of these issues were challenges that once we peeled back the can, we started to learn about for our audience. And the reason is it's inevitable as you age that you will your social circle will shrink. That can be through divorce, which is probably not as big an issue in Thailand, but in the US, it's now the largest demographic of divorce is baby boomers. People relocate and move to different cities, and sometimes it's the younger family members or the friends. People fall ill. We have many people on Stitch who are actually still married, but their partner has dementia or can't walk anymore, or so on. And of course, death leaves people lonely in some cases for decades. So, all right, so what does that mean then for then building a business? So we had something we thought was of value, and we needed to raise some capital. So I thought I'd include this for those people. Interest in the ageing sector is now global. So we're an Australian company. We went across to Silicon Valley, and this was a pitch day down in Mountain View in Silicon Valley in front of hundreds of US investors, where we presented about Stitch to try to raise some money. And ultimately, we raised capital from investors in Australia, in Asia, Middle East, the UK, and the US. There's a growing understanding of how important this is, and you're not constrained by the limits of your own country. You know, when I first tried to raise money in Australia for Tapestry, you know, a lot of the Australian investors were like, well, I'm not really sure. But once we started to look more globally, we understood that there's a lot of investors who really understand the need. So that's why, we raised capital. We built Stitch, which is now the world's leading companionship, activities, travel, and romance site for anyone over 50. It's now active in over 50 cities worldwide, and that's based purely on organic growth because we're what we call a social enterprise. The Stitch is actually a powerful global movement driven by our members. So our members are creating these Stitch communities all around the world where they're helping create value for their fellow members. We've had a bunch of fantastic press, which is really, really rewarding. And actually, Ford named us as one of the top trends for 2016, back at the beginning of the year. So that's been a wild ride, but we wouldn't have got there if we hadn't been prepared to fail and learn from those experiments. But one of the best things about Stitch is we're really focused on real social outcomes. And these are real quotes from our members. And a lot of them say the same thing, that Stitch has changed their lives. They had spent years, in some cases decades, feeling very lonely and isolated, and now had a place where they felt they could belong, both locally and also interconnected globally. And this is another part of the message. If you want to work in the ageing space, you should also be prepared that it's not necessarily the place you're going to make the most money, but it can be the place you can have the greatest social impact. And creating a business that actually has a very clear social mission creates fantastic benefits for you. It's fantastic getting up in the bed out of bed in the morning because you love what you do, but for your staff, for your customers, believe in you, and living those values that you have. In our case, we're aiming to eradicate social isolation as people get older. And we really, really believe in the impact that we're having. So, okay, we've covered so why aging, some of the opportunities and challenges, and obviously failure versus success. So let's just finish then on what that means for you. And so just to bring it all together, the kind of the summary of what I think I'd recommend everyone to really take away from today's talk is, number one, the ageing market is huge, and it's growing very rapidly, and it's full of a lot of unmet needs. So go out there and go after it. There's nothing holding you back. If you're going to, make sure you do your research and understand it. It's very easy to go in with one idea, but until you really understand the needs of your users, you won't really be able to get there. So do your research and understand it. Identify the biggest pain points, something that you care about, something that you feel customers are going to care about, your staff members are going to care about, but something that you feel that you could be passionate about working on for the next 5 or 6 years. Test before you invest. I can't stress that enough. And finally, of course, learn quickly from failure. You should expect to fail. As long as you expect and you're prepared for it, you can learn from it and find your way through to success. So, that's it for my talk. And I'd like to leave it over now to any questions that any of you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for such a beautiful presentation. And I have so many questions for you. But then,
Fantastic.
yeah, we have chose 3 of the questions from the audience. So, but first of all, I was trying to read this one. Could you help me out a little bit?
You name some of the latest innovations from the aging world. I think this question says, would you please name some of the latest innovations from the aging world? So there's some great examples. One issue is fall prevention. So when someone gets old, the number one cause of the really correlation with them dying is to have a fall in the shower. So there are a bunch of companies that are innovating around early fall prevention and how do you, so like a fitness tracker, analysing how people are walking so it can predict before a fall happens that this might actually happen. There's a fantastic little a robot it's devoted to social health. So this is a robot that can sit on somebody's desk and help them interact with the world if they can't use a computer. Transport is a big one. So when you get to a certain age and you can't drive anymore, how do we provide? You can't just use a taxi because you might need help coming out to the front door.
Yes.
There's so many businesses doing something unique there. And I think actually one thing I would say, a lot of the entrepreneurs that I meet all are solving a problem that they feel personally connected to. So they might have lost a parent to dementia, or they have someone they know in their family, and so they're all trying to do something that they really care about. And I think that's always a good place to start from if you're looking at innovation.
Okay, and I think that really get to the point, and then it's really move to the second one because this is a little bit relating to what you just said before. Let's move to this one. They say like in your country, are your people in your country prepare the society for the parents? Like I think they mean like if the parents getting older and they can really help themselves. Like in your country, are they prepared for this?
I don't think any country is really prepared for the challenges of aging. I know that in many Eastern societies, there's an expectation of the younger family members to take care of the parents.
Yeah.
But as the population switches, so there are a lot more parents and very few young people who aren't working as much, then the money isn't. There's a lot of financial challenges for that. Certainly in Australia, there's not a great preparation. We see when we look at the analysis, there's what we call a sandwich generation. So I'm part of the sandwich generation that has to be prepared to look after my parents as well as my kids.
That sandwich.
And I'm sandwiched between them. And so, look, I think in reality, some people are prepared, but as a whole, most countries are not.
Most countries are not.
But that's the good thing is that's a opportunity.
Yes. Okay, and the last question is that if you were talking about like many countries all around the world, then come back to Thailand in this issue, do you think that if it's possible to develop this kind of business in Thailand because we have a different culture and we are not really open up for anything, just like any other country. What do you think about this kind of business in Thailand?
I absolutely believe you can. So Thailand is actually a hugely creative country. Every time I've come here, I've been amazed and particularly from an art and culture perspective, and a lot of the great innovations these days is not necessarily fueled by advanced R&D, but actually it's the creative side of things. So it's the social side, it's the design, it's those sorts of things. The great thing about technology today is you don't need a lot of investment to be able to build something that can change people's lives. And you've got these great distribution channels through apps and the web that means, when we started my business, Actually, when I started Tapestry, I remember being told you could not build a business from Australia that was going to be like this. Fast forward to Stitch, and by the time Stitch was around, the investors were saying, yeah, sure, no problem. And of course, now we're being successful. So I think the same is true in Thailand. People will tell you it can't be done because it has not been done before, but that doesn't mean it can't be done. In fact, I think now is probably a better time than ever in history for Thailand to be thinking about some of these things because you've got a really great the history and the culture of Thailand allows you to understand a lot of the needs from an Eastern perspective, but also there's a lot of great links to the rest of the world, and I think Thailand can be that bridge. So I'm very optimistic about Thailand.
Okay, that was very inspiring. So, and today I think they all actually we received many papers, but I have only this amount of time for you. Okay. So everyone, please give another round of applause for Mr. Andrew. Thank you very much.
Thank you.